Love is a powerful force that permeates every aspect of our life.
At the core of it all, under our evidence, terminology, and funding structures, love is the foundational piece to ending sexual and intimate partner violence. In a movement made almost entirely of survivors, we know that healthy love will heal our communities and create a world free of violence. But how do we bring love into our day-to-day when so much of how our culture and work structures operate challenge the idea of love in and of itself? Audrey Jordan and Shiree Teng recently came together to speak to our movement about radical love, love of self, of others, and community as the vehicle for primary prevention in a recent PreventConnect Web Conference. It revealed just how challenging it can be for preventionists to see love in their program structures and outcomes. For this episode of PreventConnect, I got to chat with two people that I really admire in this field. Rosa Beltra, who leads Ohio's Alliance to End Sexual Violence, and Ashley Klein-Jimenez, Director of Prevention at Valor in California.
I have a choice to either disrupt systemic oppression or be complicit in it.
Another mic drop, honestly. Rosa and Ashley are both women who cultivate love while remaining fierce leaders in their work to end violence. We're talking about where love comes into our work, why it can be challenging for us to talk about, and what it looks like in prevention strategies and implementations. This is a conversation that quickly became one of my favorites I've ever had on this podcast. I personally learned a lot, and I hope you do too. Well, I am joined today by two folks that I really admire in this work, Ashley and Rosa. I'm so excited to have you all. Obviously, everyone knows that Ashley works with me on PreventConnect and at Valor. And Rosa, I feel I'm such a big fan of yours, and I'm so excited to have you on this podcast. We had you for a series that we did on health equity in practice about the connection between anti-racism and health equity. And I could sing your praises like all day. Can you let our audience know a little bit about what you're up to these days?
Definitely. It's an honor to actually be with you and to be invited to be in this space. So I am the president and CEO of the Ohio Alliance to End Sexual Violence, which is our statewide coalition against sexual assault. We have 35 rape crisis programs, which more than half are standalone rape crisis program. And again, as a coalition doing some of the macro level work, but being very intentional in recognizing that we have to shift this mentality of only doing gender-based violence work with an actual intervention lens, that it has to be hand in hand with prevention. And we advocate in reference to funding for our programs to actually be able to do prevention, not just outreach prevention, even though they might not receive rape prevention education funding through the Department of Health or CDC funding, but that is the core, right? That we should exist until we are able to eradicate sexual violence in any of our communities. And that has to be with a preventive lens. But at the same time, recognizing all of the intersections that actually exist with the work. And that is not only gender, but also race, right? And elevating all of those dynamics and being able to do the work with intentionality and an anti-oppressive lens in the way that we lead, the way that we show up, the way that we try to engage others, but also in the way that we try to hold others and ourselves accountable for truly doing the work. So excited. We have phenomenal people on our team that have also participated in the work, Sarah, as well as Caitlin, and hoping to continue to grow as we lead, again, with that preventive lens and all of the intersections that it actually means to do the work.
Typically with the PreventConnect podcast, we bring on folks who are doing prevention work across the US to talk about their innovative strategies, their prevention strategies. And, we really believe in a learning community and folks learning from each other. And we are doing that in this podcast, but we're also doing something a little bit different. We want to talk about love and love's role in our work. Ashley, I'm curious for you, and I didn't plan this question, but I want to ask it anyways. Working with PreventConnect, kind of doing this national landscape, where do you see vulnerability playing into this conversation? And why did you want to have this conversation in the first place?
That's a big question, Janae, but I think, so I'll just start off by saying that I have always truly felt like I loved people in general, just I love people. And when I say I love people, what I mean is that I truly want to see everyone's humanity, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that I like everyone or that I agree with everyone, but at a basic level, I love you. I see you as a person. I love you. And I always kind of felt like that was separate from my prevention work. That's just okay, that's who I am. That's something that I believe in. But when I started thinking about this idea of love and power and what that has to do with prevention, and let me back up, because the way that I even got to that was I was introduced to Shiree, Teng, and Audrey Jordan's work and their brown papers on love and on, how do you measure love? Is that something that we can measure? What role does love play? And it just all of a sudden made sense. The things that I really felt and believed in, suddenly I was oh, actually, I can infuse that into our work. They go hand in hand. They're not separate. That really, in order to do prevention work that is responsive to communities that are experiencing the most harm, that actually gives them the leadership to lead in prevention, and that acknowledges the role that years and years and years, decades and decades and decades of racist policies and practices and programs have created these environments where sexual and domestic violence is more likely to happen. The work to undo that, if it's not rooted in love, what is it rooted in? Right? And so it just excited me. But to hear Shiree and Audrey talk about their work and talk about what that means to them was just an experience that I didn't know I was going to get to have. And I just felt if they would be willing to share that with our PreventConnect audience, and I was so glad when they said yes, then we could bring more people along to think about these things and maybe think about ways that our prevention work has caused more harm in communities. Think about how we can really shift that so we learn from the past and don't continue to do that. And also just realize that our stories do play a role in how we approach prevention. And that does take vulnerability to share with each other. But at the end of the day, we're people and we do love, right? Love is a universal language. So why shouldn't that be part of our prevention work?
I mentioned that I look up to both of you a lot. For a little bit of context, Ashley is my supervisor and was the first person that I met. There's a reason for that. I know you always introduce me as your colleague and your friend, which I think is part of that love in person first as well. But you were the first person that I met in a coalition space when I went from a local rape crisis center to the coalition space. And I remember feeling the difference. And even it's been 2 years since then, the way that you interact with me, it is very much love-centered and person-centered. And Rosa, we haven't gotten to interact as much, but the vibe that I get from you and from the Ohio Alliance is very similar. If I think about leaders who are doing this work in different ways and centering what makes me passionate about ending sexual and domestic violence, I think about you too. You're listening to PreventConnect, the podcast bringing together voices from across the movement to end gender and power-based violence, to give you the tools to practice primary prevention in your daily life and at work. We're highlighting emerging research, promising strategies, and stories from on-the-ground prevention practitioners doing this work in new and innovative ways. Bringing you topics like foundational strategies to prevent violence, primary prevention and youth engagement, critical race theory and school climates, prevention in a digital age, and more. I'm your host, Janae Sargent, and this is PreventConnect. Rosa, I want to go to you for a moment. You've been in this movement for a long time, and you are one of the leaders of it. What has been your experience with vulnerability in the movement? Do you think that that's something that folks working in anti-violence, and I say working in anti-violence, do well?
Whew, what a question. I joined and I was part of the series of the training, yet it was invigorating and at the same time I know so intimidating because we don't use love, right? As much in doing this work. We don't use it towards each other. We don't use it towards survivors. We don't express it. We have shield from what it is because it's difficult, right? But love is a powerful force that permeates every aspect of our life. I'm a hopeless romantic, right? As general. And some people have issues in reference to what is positive reinforcement and being too positive. But I think it has to go align with what love is. And I am like you. I love everybody. I might not like you, but I love you as a human, right? Like as a core. And it's devastating to see, even as people do the work in this movement, that they are so shielded from love and what love can actually bring and flourish. But at its core, love is about empathy and it's about compassion and it's about respect for others. And when we are able to infuse our work with love, we approach it with a deep sense of care and concern, not only for the movement externally, right? But for the people that we're around, and recognizing too that more than 90% of the people that are doing this work are survivors themselves and are needing love, right? So that has a lot. So I just wanted to add that there. And it's difficult sometimes to actually show that vulnerability of love because people come with compounded trauma to this space and with their yields, right, and their walls that makes it very difficult to actually show love, genuine love, right, without anything in concern that people find it weird, that there are people like Ashley or I and others even in leadership position, that genuinely not only love the work, but want to show love to the people that are working with us, right? And that they are willing to accept that. But to be honest with me, in this aspect of vulnerability, there's a lot of components here, especially because I'm a Latina, right? Like I'm an Afro-Taína Latina. And the language within this movement of gender-based violence prevention and as a whole is that we, as people of color, cannot be vulnerable enough to do the work, or that you cannot be professional enough while also being vulnerable, because that is a sense of weakness. So for me, in order to prevent gender-based violence, my journey of embracing that vulnerability and authenticity really involves redefining the concepts of love and self-love and understanding that vulnerability is not my weakness. It's actually my superpower, that it's okay to be vulnerable enough to show love, to accept love, to be empathetic, to need empathy from others. But it's also about recognizing that I should never be forced to share my survivorship, my victimization, nor my lived experience in order to be seen, heard, validated, or deserving of any type of love in this movement. When we talk about these aspects of how vulnerable can I be, can we truly be vulnerable in speaking about, right? It's like social workers and counselors were never allowed to talk about their experience or hold people's hand. And you had to have this, that was the movement as a whole. Like, no, you never talk, you never, right? It's always about them, even as advocates or preventionists. Like, you never show. And I am like, when are we going to connect as humans, right? When will it be okay to actually dismantle this narrowness and these definitions of oppressive behaviors and contexts that have been imposed by society of what professionalism should look like, because that's what has carved this entire conversation, and also our removal from the spaces of seeing our humanity in doing this work, and how we come with those layers. And it's about recognizing that, honoring the inherent worth and dignity of myself as well as others, regardless of backgrounds, regardless of experience, regardless of identities. It's about cultivating a deep sense of compassion, of empathy, of acceptance towards myself, first of all, and the mistakes that I might make also in the process, even in the face of societal messages that seek to diminish my worth as an Afro-Taina Latina doing this work. So it takes a lot of vulnerability, and it takes a lot of shifting of what is it to be vulnerable and what do I equate that to. It has been a transformative revelation in my journey personally. As a leader, as a human, as a survivor, and embracing myself fully and loving myself fully, indistinctively of what others are expecting or portraying.
I love the way that you talk about self-love. And I think like this part of what you said, Rosa, also just reminds me of the necessity of making space for healing and prevention.
Yes.
Whether, right, like knowing that so many of us are survivors, but even if someone isn't a survivor, they may have been really harmed in this work. And so how can we expect people to be vulnerable when they maybe were punished for that vulnerability? And the other thing you said about like, you know, not being able to connect, it just reminds me of like, that's something that I always think is that's how white supremacy culture operates.
Yes.
Is by like separating us and not wanting us to connect. And I remember coming up in this movement as an advocate and being told like, you never disclose your own survivorship. But sometimes like when I'm having a hard time, if someone can share that they've actually experienced something similar, like that means everything in the world to me. And so feeling like that wasn't acceptable, that wasn't a possibility. It's just like, how do I connect with people?
You know, it's so interesting. As you were talking, I was thinking, on one hand, I cannot think of a movement that is a more natural fit to love, right? I mean, interpersonal violence, sexual and domestic violence. On one hand, I'm like, of course, love is the answer there. That feels like it makes so much sense. And then on the other hand, our movement has been ripe with racism and sexism and corporate culture. And so while on one hand, we can understand theoretically the place that love has in healthy communities, on the other, these are our actual jobs in a movement that has done a lot of harm. So we're working to create these really person-centered solutions while not often feeling safe or supported to be person-centered at work. We collect paychecks and show up as with our professional hats on. You know, I had a different career before I came to this one, and I know that if I showed up today, how I showed up in that previous career, I would have had a terrible experience. And it's a huge adjustment. So how do all of those barriers impact how we approach the work?
What a great question. How do we show up and showing up? You know what? Even when talking about love with accountability, there's many layers to that, not only within the movement, right? But if we go to the core, even of the people that hurt us, there's a piece of, I love those that perpetrated the violence, right? But how can I still love you and hold you accountable? So I love Aisha Simmons' book, Love with Accountability, right? And that practice, again, right? Like the reality of that core that I could still love you, but I could hold you accountable. And it's the same principle, right? In reference to how do I show up to do this work? In the premise of love, of reclaiming my power, my agency, and advocating for a future where love is expansive, where self-love is radical, where love is accountable, and vulnerability is celebrated as a strength, right? It's about creating spaces where all individuals are seen, are heard, are valued, and who they are without judgment of expectation. So when we talk about in this community of love, we have to do a lot of training and dismantle a lot of systems, right? And it's so true, Janae. I mean, this level of white supremacists and professionalism that we've incorporated into a movement that continues to be about harm reduction. But we, with our policies, with our productivity, with demands, right? With even the way that we're asking people to show up, inflict so much harm and continue to perpetrate so much violence. I was telling a director yesterday, because we were talking about that. How do you show up authentically into spaces? And what is authentic? And how much do you have to lose by being authentic, right? And is it true? Because the reality is that some of the ways in which we have continued to do this work continues to follow the trails of money, right? Like money, funding, this is how we have to do it. And we shift based on that, but we forget all of the human components of what it actually means, and even retaliations and repercussions and supervision and in the model. But we have to be intentional, right? About how is it that we're measuring and evaluating and imparting and creating spaces, even though it might be challenging. So some of the things that I put when I saw your question was like, love in the context of program implementation can manifest in several tangible ways, right? So it could be about cultivating a culture of care. What does that mean? So it's about implementing programs with a focus on love, means creating an environment where particularly people feel valued, they feel respected, they feel supported. This can involve anything from prioritizing empathy, compassion, active listening, in all interactions of their participation. It's about also creating or implementing a program about promoting self-love and empowerment, which is programs can incorporate activities and interventions that promote self-love amongst their participants. This might include a workshop on self-care, self-esteem, building exercise, opportunities for participants to reflect on celebrating their strengths and accomplishments, right? We're good at, let's go ahead and do the SWOT analysis of what we're doing, right? And we're concentrating, and normally we go with the threats and opportunities, but we don't spend enough time on truly the wins and what is it that we're actually celebrating and doing well, and reflecting on those strengths that actually exist and accomplishments as programmatic, but also as individuals, right? And how are we celebrating those? I would say it's also about fostering connection. And we talked about that before, right? And community, love thrives and threads in spaces where there is a sense of belonging, a sense of connection. And love truly does overcome everything. I strongly believe that to my core. Like, I could go preachy on it. Love endures everything. But what is that endurance, right? Like, what is it that we're enduring? What is it that we're supporting? Because we don't want to love on or have those love components even in policies and standards and community-based practices of prevention, that it hurts others, right? Like, we have to also understand those paradigms of what it actually means. But love is about threading. It is about creating spaces of belonging and connecting. It is about respecting how others want to be loved. And loved might be seen in organizations, not necessarily by paycheck. Or, oh, we do this work and we get a paycheck. Da, 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 da. But some people's love language, it's about celebration or self-care days, right? Or give me more vacation, give me a 32-hour work week, give me autonomy to do this work, right? Let me connect, treat me as an adult. Allow me to make the decisions that I need. Let me connect. Don't micromanage me, right? Like, let me create my own work plan. Let me create my own scheduling for work. Give me those flexibility. Let me work from home. And not only because it was COVID, but the reality of productivity, or what does it mean to be safe in my space, or being an introvert and not wanting to connect with everybody in the office, right? Or not being common and still being, right, being productive and being happy, or I'm in my happy space with my dog or my cat, or or in jammies, and I'm still being there. That's how an organization can love on their staff, right? And then that will translate into the love of the communities and the programmings that we're actually doing, because it will be manifested. When a person feels love, when the environment is based on love, it is based on trust, and then all of the programmatic that is actually created will permeate love in all of the languages that it's needed. And then we can truly say, I am making significant change in behaviors.
PreventConnect is taking this conversation even further on our social media, and we want you to be a part of the discussion. Join in on the conversation on our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, where we're posting excerpts from this podcast and so many more, and asking experts, practitioners, and followers like you to share your stories and ideas. Search PreventConnect on your social media platforms to get involved.
Rosa, thank you for sharing all of those examples. That's incredible. And it resonates so deeply. We hear often that, people are like, well, how can I quantify love? What does that look like in practice? People are very much about what does that look like in practice? And it reminds me of value that you didn't say this value, but it's something that I felt was something that I see often, which is, our organizations have to do the things that our staff are doing in communities. You have to do it internally first. We talk about that when it comes to economic justice and racial justice and disability justice. It also comes with compassion and vulnerability and love. How can a staff person go out and practice that in a community with their programs if they are not feeling that by their organizations? And that's such a foundational piece to this too, because I imagine that some folks might be listening to this and feeling quite depleted and drained, and like another thing is on their backs, and
am wanting to say too that, if you are one of those people, you also deserve the support of your organization. And if you are a leader of an organization, think about if your staff feel that way. And if they don't, what are some things that organizations can do to challenge that culture as well? Ashley, I saw some wheels turning for you as Rosa was talking as well. Do you have anything you'd like to add?
I mean, I feel like Rosa just had a mic drop moment. Like that was just okay. I mean, gosh, there are just so many gems in everything that you just said. But yeah, I think about something that we talked about in the session today, or I guess I talked about it when I was just kind of like trying to frame our conversation, was this idea that, a lot of us are trying to change systems, but systems are at the end of the day made up of people. And so systems don't change unless people change. And I heard that in what you were saying, Rosa, that, we have to change the way we do things if we want to influence the way that things are structured. And I think about, this is something I also talked about today, was this quote from Father Greg Boyle, who was the founder of Homeboy Industries. He said that love is the answer, community is the context, and tenderness is the methodology. And so now it's like this question of what does it mean to be tender? Like, what does tenderness mean? But I think everything that you said, Rosa, is speaking to that. Like, to be tender with one another, to be tender in how we approach working in a community that we don't belong to. What does that look like? And I'm sure it varies, between individuals, but it feels like that tenderness is like the connective tissue between like the love that we have in our hearts and our heads and like actually showing that in practice.
I love that piece about that tenderness, right? And sometimes it's a gem, right? That is so rough on the edges and is so afraid of being tender, because that's part of that vulnerability that people are not accustomed to showing. Because again, it's measured with whether I'm weak or not. But yes, it is. And when you said, Janine, about the ability of centering healing in prevention, it is also part about that tenderness. I normally use the word grace also. Like, for me, love is also grace, extending yourself grace and extending other grace, right? Because one of the other things within this movement, and not only organizationally, but as a whole, is that we have been so quick to call people out, right, when they're making a mistake. And we have also been so quick of pulling our hats of being not only an activist, but an ally or a co-conspirator for anybody in the movement that supposedly doesn't have a voice, that in that process of calling out, and supposedly holding people accountable or telling you what is right or what should be, or this is how we prevent, we exclude so many, and we show more hate than we do love. We show more punitive measures than we actually do about what should be when we are talking about prevention, in the sense of we want change behaviors, right? We want to avoid this from happening in all of the layers. We want to also prioritize healing and well-being, and love will encompass a commitment of that holistic well-being of an individual and their communities, right? And it's impossible to actually do that if we're not centering internally the people. And that's from every layers, because sometimes it's, we're executing and doing things from the top down. But I am going to be completely honest and vulnerable from you. I have experienced a lot of hurt from the bottom up, and no sense of meeting me halfway either, right? I've also experienced love being performative. Yeah. As a lot of our work in this movement is, right? Like, performative. So love needs to be genuine. Love needs to be unapologetic. love is also messy. um, Love is not always quantifiable nor measurable. And in this era that we live of prevention and report, everything has to be, a best practice. It also has to be measurable, quantifiable. It has to, right, have evaluation matrix. And we're almost creating a logic model in order for it to, right, like, to be evidence-based and to be approved. And no, love is love, and love, again, is messy, is sticky, is difficult. It has growing pains, it's vulnerable, it's tactful, but it is healing rain, right? And people have to be willing to actually lean in, stop quantifying. It's not a checkbox, right? You cannot measure it in the way that we want to see it in qualitative data. We have to look at transformation, and we talk a lot about storytelling, but we don't allow the time for those stories to even flourish, right? And to be bonded and created and experimented with, because you do have to utilize different tools and recognize ultimately how people are coming into this work, people are navigating their own issues. And also at the same time, there's something that I normally tell, especially leadership, right? Like, there's only so much that I could do and show others that I genuinely love my staff. I genuinely love this work. I genuinely love my state. Again, I love you, even if I might not like you or might not see eye to eye, right? And I am not being hypocritical. I am not navigating into the space. I'm not doing it because out of the fear of being booted out by the board. Is genuinely within my core, but there's only so much that I can do and create while other people also have to work on their traumas. Mm-hmm. And the way that they're showing up to do this work, right? And there's so many people that have been hurt that are coming into the space with hurt. And I think we use this phrase a lot. Hurt people continue to hurt people, even experts in this field, right? But when people come with organizational traumas, it doesn't matter how much leadership tries to create a culture of love and fostering and threading and healing and support, because they haven't done the work, right? So anything that is presented to them, they don't receive it because love is a foreign language, right? So one of the things that I normally do say to others is, I really need you to also do your work, your self-worth, your love, your understanding, and your dynamics of what it is for you to feel loved by the organization, for it not to be performative, and to accept what is being given by grace by everybody, and also to receive the measure of love that others are giving, because they're only giving what they have received. And some people need to relearn what it is to give and to accept love.
Mm-hmm. I'm reflecting on a few things that you said, and I have often felt in myself and in others that there is this big internal calling to constantly prove yourself in this field, right? Prove yourself as a survivor who knows what they're talking about. Prove yourself in your job. Prove yourself in a white, cisgender, heteronormative space. Prove yourself to your funder. Prove yourself as an ally and the most knowledgeable, woke person in the room. And that makes so much sense when you talk about organizational traumas and other traumas that we bring into this movement. And I'm reflecting on what you said, that love is messy, like acknowledging that doing this day in and day out, confronting yourself, holding yourself accountable, loving yourself, loving others when you don't like them is not easy work. And there are true practical things that we have to come head to head with, that when you hold love as a value and you are working within a grant, like that is a barrier that exists in this work. And we're here because we choose to be here, and we want folks to be willing to engage in that messiness. And that kind of brings me to this conversation around measuring love that we're having right now. So we're releasing this podcast in conjunction with a 3-part web conference series with Shiree, Teng, and Audrey Jordan, really talking about love and vulnerability and shame and its core piece in the movement, in the journey to end sexual and intimate partner violence. Ashley, I'm turning to you now because you were one of the leading forces in bringing this training in. I'm curious for you, as a national trainer, as someone who's been around for quite some time, why did it feel so integral for you to bring this training to folks? And what are you hoping that the movement takes away from it?
I mean, part of it is that I think that a lot of prevention practitioners are doing a lot of this work. We're just not using the same language. What could be more loving than trying to change environments where everyone has what they need to reach their full potential in life, right? Like that is about love. When we talk about like social connectedness as a prevention strategy, isn't that really just like another measure of love, being socially connected to each other? So like a lot of these strategies and these like visions that we have for prevention, they are already rooted in love, but love is actually a much more accessible way of talking about them. Which I think is part of like where we're having this, we have to have this shift, right? Because we're actually used to talking about things like using really complex, gatekeepy words. And when we say, no, we're actually just talking about love and like loving ourselves, loving each other, what does that look like? How do we show that? How do we put that into practice? Then that's hard for us. Because we don't typically talk about love. At least I haven't been in many spaces in this work, like training specifically, where that's kind of like the core concept. So I just felt like we're engaged in this work that really does demand us to look at ourselves. Like Shiree said in the first session, are you who you say you are? Are you who you say you are when no one's looking? Right? Do your actions align with your values? I wanted to just give us all an opportunity to think about that. And I wish it was more than a 90-minute web conference, but I hope and I assume that people will be doing this in their states and in their communities also. So yeah, that was really kind of the thinking behind it, Janae.
And Rosa, you were in the audience for the first session. So I'd love to hear from you. What was that experience like for you, being a part of that conversation with other coalition leaders?
It was great. And as soon as I saw the title, right, and also the presenters, I jumped in and I'm like, oh, let me sign up. But I also noticed a hesitation in some, right, about showing or when we were divided in work groups, being able to share truly of what was expected. So there was a lot of silence and awkwardness at times, because again, this is new and people are always hesitant to engage in the new. But I truly believe in going through the journeys, being authentic in the way that we show up. But again, people are so afraid about that call out also where you're doing it wrong. Or being evaluated in each and every one of their answers, that they forget to be authentic, right? And I am hoping that as we continue to actually talk about this process, that it would generate more connections, that it would generate not only the aspect of how vulnerability is that superpower, but also how we have to do this work rooted in love, right? And how we could transform and change the way in which we have been doing this work. Because to reality, it hasn't worked. The way that we've done it in the past, not rooted in love, hasn't worked. So, hey, can we try something a little bit more holistic and truly in the essence of mind, body, and soul in the way that we are looking at eradicating violence from occurring?
If you're looking for more content like this, head to PreventConnect.org. We've got tools, guides, and resources on how to prevent sexual and intimate partner violence in your community, all for free and in one easy-to-access digital space. From live web conferences and recordings to a running blog, resource library, e-learning, and online community, PreventConnect has everything you need to implement and evaluate innovative prevention initiatives in your community. All of that and more available for free at PreventConnect.org.
I referred to myself, I think 2 years ago in a podcast, as a messily recovering perfectionist. And I have been thinking during this web conference series, as one of the background facilitators, only I would find, and not only me, I think a lot of people, but I was thinking to myself, only I would find a way to fail at being, at having love, at cultivating love. Like today, Audrey Jordan was sharing about this 5-step process to cultivating love and vulnerability that started with like unconscious incompetence and then ended with unconscious competence. And I was like, which rating am I at? And how can I move myself up that rating? And then I was like, Janae, that's part of the problem. And I joked with Ashley before this web conference series that I really feel like Audrey and Shiree called my therapist. And we're like, how can we just like really drive the point home for Janae? I share that because I feel like I am a little baby when it comes to a lot of this work. Like, I think there are some things about my job that I am excellent at. I think I'm great in a chaotic moment and I can pump things out and I can really show up and I can overproduce. And then there are some things that I feel a lot of shame around of not being able to show up. And I imagine if I feel that way, a lot of folks feel that way. And we're all at different points in our journey. I know we're coming up toward the end of our conversation. I would love to hear from you both. If there's anything that you'd like to share about your own journey to cultivating love within yourself, with others, and within the movement. And then maybe some compassionate words or encouragement that you would have for other folks who are little babies like me. Encourage me.
Actually, I just wanted to take a moment, right? And maybe that's the advocate in me. But what you just did and said, Janae, takes so much courage and vulnerability to be able to actually not only talk about in therapy or am I here, right? Like evaluating myself and being able to recognize the perfectionism in ourselves and how are we grading and evaluating that's what we need. So, and then it's okay, right? That to express that, but that takes guts and values, and I respect that. So thank you for sharing that with us, and thank you for actually expanding what it actually does mean with actions to be in any space and truly be vulnerable about our flaws or the ways that we see ourselves or evaluate ourselves and the need for growth that we continue to do this. So for me, in my particular journey, it's actually, again, like I came to the realization that, first, I don't have to disclose. Like the privilege of disclosing to whom I disclose or how I do this work is an act of love to me, to humanity, and whoever is before me, right? Second is I can only show up and do what is authentic and real to me. And unfortunately, if you don't receive that as such, it's your loss. I cannot navigate the spaces that I'm in, always trying not only to figure you out, but also to seek for your love and your acceptance and your validation of my acts of love and kindness and generosity and empathy and leading, right? So that's me in this journey. And again, that is compounded by the micromanagement, as well as being in a scope. We cannot talk about this without understanding the dynamics of that. It's different for a woman of color, or BIPOC, or a person of color to show vulnerability and love in any space. The measurements are and repercussions are different from my white people, right? Like, and in that space, and it's different, right? And owning that and understanding that, and then understanding what feels safe for me also in that space is very important for me in that journey. And then also cutting the cord. This is who I am, right? Whether you believe it or not, that's all I could do. But for those of you, right, as we're closing today that are listening to us and are newer to the journey of incorporating love, self-love, and community love into your work, I would offer the following words of encouragement and compassion, but at the same time, a challenge, right? So embrace the process. Number one, embrace the process. Remember that the journey in itself is a process, not a destination, that it is okay to take small steps and make gradual progress over time, that nobody is, Shiree, going to give you a grade at the end of your journey. Be patient with yourself and trust that every effort that you are making towards infusing love into your work does matter. I would also encourage you and say that cultivate self-compassion, to be gentle with yourself as you navigate this journey. Acknowledge that it's natural to encounter challenges and setbacks along the way, that there might be people that are not comfortable with love or vulnerability, that you might not be comfortable there yet, but I hope that you practice self-compassion by offering yourself kindness, understanding, forgiveness when things don't go as planned. To lean on community, seek support and guidance from others who might share similar values and aspirations as you. To connect with mentors, with peers, with your therapists, with allies who can offer encouragement, advice, and solidarity in your personal journey, and to remember that you are not alone in this work. I also invite you to stay open to learning, to approach this journey with curiosity and willingness to learn, to be open to new perspective, to new ways, to new ideas, to new experiences that may challenge the existing beliefs that you actually have, or assumptions or biases that you have towards the work, towards the people, towards the community, even that you're serving, and to embrace opportunities for growth and self-reflection. I also invite you to challenge yourself. While it's important to be compassionate towards ourselves, don't be afraid to challenge yourself, to step outside of your comfort zone, to push yourself to have difficult conversations, to confront systematic barriers and systemic approaches, to advocate for change within your organizations, within your community of practice, within your close networks of friends and people that might be like-minded like you. I also invite you to celebrate progress, that those small steps that you are making, take time to celebrate the progress that you have made, no matter how small it might seem. Celebrate the moments of connections, of understanding, of positive impact that you have experienced along the way. Celebrate even the times that you have been able to sleep a little better, to eat a little better, because you have decided to love and to self-love, to recognize that every step forward is worth celebrating, no matter how big or small they are. I also ask you to remember your why as you're doing this work. Keep your purpose, your motivation at the forefront of your mind. Reflect on why you embark on this journey in the first place and the positive impact that you hope to make in the lives of others. That first impact should be on your own life. And let your passion and commitment guide you forward. Incorporate it. Don't be afraid in being courageous and understanding that this is a transformative endeavor. So stay true to yourself, trust your abilities, and believe in the power of love to create positive change in the world that you want to see.
Another mic drop. Honestly, thank you. Wow. Ashley, do you have anything that you would like to add?
Yeah. I mean, after that, not really. That was just beautiful, Rosa. I think for me, I'll just say that I'm approaching this with the knowledge that I have a choice all the time, every day. I am faced with choices to either disrupt systemic oppression or be complicit in it. I always have a choice. And sometimes I will make the wrong choice because of for so many reasons. I want to follow the rules. Oh, we have a policy that says this. Even if my heart is telling me like that's actually not right. I don't know, maybe I'm afraid to get fired. And so I choose the wrong option. There's all these reasons. And so while every day I want to make the right choice to be disruptive, I also don't want to fall into shame if I make the wrong choice, because that's actually not going to get anyone anywhere better if I'm just sitting in shame. So I think I am allowing myself to really understand that these are choices that I get to make and that I have to make. And I just invite other people to think about the choices that they're faced with that allow them to be either complicit or disruptive, and to really hone in on why we're choosing the choice that we're choosing in those moments. Because it might help us make less of the wrong choices and more of the right choices in the future.
Thank you. Thank you both. And that's part of it too. Like Audrey said today, we have to compost shame and guilt to be able to create pathways to love ourselves and others. Well, Ashley, Rosa, thank you so much for your time, for your vulnerability, for sharing yourselves with me and with our audience. I was stressed about my schedule today and was stressed about this interview. And now I'm feeling so uplifted and so happy that it happened. You've mic dropped on me today, and I just deeply appreciate you both.
PreventConnect is brought to you by Valor US and the Centers for Disease Control. You can find more information about this episode, along with past episodes, web conferences, and blog articles at PreventConnect.org. As we work to bring you more podcasts like this one, we need your help ensuring that this podcast and others like it reaches listeners like you. Take a second to rate this podcast wherever you're listening to it. That helps us show up on main podcasting pages and reach new listeners. And of course, if you have an idea for a topic that you'd like to see us cover, reach out to us and comment on this post on our Instagram page.